Hello, everyone. Today we'll continue talking about Kant in his conception of the good life. So the good life is more or less straightforward for him. To have a good life is to live in a way that you're master of yourself, that you are the source of your actions, that you live freely. And for Kant, that means that you act in a way that is moral. So it's the virtuous life. So that's the basic idea. And just stated away, it might seems more or less straightforward, more or less easy, at least in principle, to understand. And Kant thinks it is easy to understand. It is very hard to do. And it is very hard to do because of human natures. Built into who we are, what it is to be human, are very serious obstacles in the pursuit of mastery and freedom. And today's discussion is going to be on that. It's going to be kind of a sad discussion about the obstacles that we have to be truly free, to be master of ourselves. So, human nature. Uh, so Store writes, Store is the other book. We are our own worst enemy when it comes to living rationally. And again, to live rationally is to be free, which is to have a good life. So it matters a lot that we are our own worst enemy when it comes to living rationally. For Kant, that means that we are our worst enemy when it comes to having a good life. There are many obstacles outside of ourselves. Sometimes people can be a pain. Our society can be, political corruption, the economy doesn't work to our favor, right? So there are a lot of external obstacles for living a good life and a happy life. Yet Kant thinks the most important obstacle is within us. There are obstacles within our own very kind of self that make it hard for us to have a good life, and they're more important than the obstacles outside. So let's look at some of those obstacles. Here are the two main reasons for thinking that we're our worst enemy, or the two main factors that make us be the worst enemy. And the first one is the kind of takes of biology, as it were. Here's how Stoll puts it. We are a confused model of emotions, passions, desires, and inclinations. So these things, emotions, passions, desires, and inclinations, are the dictates of biology. They're the ways in which biology kind of like encodes our behavior. They're the kind of shortcuts that biology uses to get us to do different things, especially pass the genes into the next generation and survive and so on. But still, like they are the ways in which emotion gets us to do things. Some things we desire, they feel good, so we strive towards them. Some things we don't like, they feel painful, so we back away from them and so on. That's how biology kind of has encoded shortcuts for us to behave in different ways. In Sometimes they help, right? If you're in the middle of the woods and the tiger's coming towards you, fear, it takes over and you run as fast as you can. Have this threat, this great amount of energy, so you can get away, right? And that's kind of the context in which biology imposes these kinds of things onto us. But when we're talking about having a good life in a now pretty safe social environment, some of these things are actually pretty serious obstacles. Why? Well, here are the two main reasons why they're obstacles. One is because they are blind. And what does that mean? Well, that the emotions are not actually concerned with what is good for us or for others, at least not as such. Fear, if directed at something that is fearful, like a tiger, then it turns out, yeah, it is what is good for you. Running away from the tiger is good because it prolongs your existence. But many times, like most phobias, fear doesn't have to be, and it's not necessarily oriented towards things that are good. Many times we fear the unknown. We're afraid of new things, and those new things are many times much better for us than what we have. So, but we choose to stay with the known bad thing instead of going on to the good, better thing that is unknown because we fear the unknown. The point is that emotions and passions and desires are in the deep sense blind. They don't understand whether their object is good or bad. They just kind of feel and then they move around. They have us, they push us around. So the blind nature of emotions is a serious obstacle. If we're trying to do what is good for ourselves and for others, then merely going with emotions is going to miss the target. Sometimes it's going to get right, sometimes, but sometimes it's going to miss. Emotions are not the infallible guide towards truth. In fact, they err a lot of the time. Um, that's true. For Kant, though, it's really the second of these considerations that is the most important one. It is biology that gives us these passions, these desires, and these inclinations. And because biology is the one that gives us, we did not choose our biology. So to act on the basis of these biological inclinations is not to act freely, because it is to act on the basis of something external to ourselves. It is not to act on the basis of a principle we give to ourselves. So when we unreflectively act on the basis of these biological urges, desires, inclinations, and passions, and so on, we are undermining our own freedom, and we are thus failing to be masters of ourselves, and we are thus our worst enemy when it comes to living rationally. We're not even trying; we're just letting our passions get over our agency and settling the actions for ourselves. That's a major obstacle for living a rational life, a good life, a moral life, for me, masters of ourselves. Here's the second one, though, and they're both very serious for Kant. The second one is that we're prone to misuse of reason. So reason is our friend, right? Reason is the seat of freedom. We are free to the extent that we're able to reason, because the two main elements in our nature are the passions or the emotions, and reason and the passions are given to us by biology. We have the control over those. We do have control when we think. That's the only space in ourselves in which we have control. So that's good. However, we sometimes use reason against itself. And for Kant, he uses the word rationalize. So let's use the word that Kant, and the way that Kant does. To rationalize is to misuse reason, or to use reason against itself. And Kant points out, if you look at our selves, when we act, we rationalize, we abuse reason a lot. And here's an example that might be relevant to students. So it's the day before an exam, and you know you should study for the exam. You should study more than you have, perhaps. But there's the video game there, right? And the video game is attractive, it's enticing, and then you feel this desire for playing the video game. And those are the right words. You know, you understand that studying is better for you, for your life goals. It's the right thing to do. It's the good thing to do. It's what is conducive to you being a better version of yourself, and so on. But you feel the desire for immediate satisfaction of playing the game. And that's a desire, feels a particular way. You did not give yourself the desire. So now you find yourself in this predicament, either doing the thing that you know is right for you, or succumbing to your desire for immediate, self-satisfaction of the game, and undermine your goal of having an education and so on. So what do you do in that case? Well, here's what Kant points out. Sometimes what we do is we don't like those options. We don't like that we must choose between what feels good, our biology, and what we know is good for us. So we use a reason to kind of deceive ourselves. We delude ourselves into thinking that what is good for us is in fact what the biology is telling us. So you start telling yourself, in this case, something like, well, I don't have to study for so many hours. As long as I study for 3 or 4 hours, I'll be fine. I've been working all of this time. I deserve a little break. Come on, what's just playing a couple of hours? That's not a big deal, right? You start telling yourself these stories, or even worse, something like, that professor is so unfair anyway. This is not even my major, and you start just saying truths that are by themselves true, but you start constructing them into this kind of narrative that leads to oh, it turns out playing the video game is the right thing. That's the thing you should do. Is what is good for you, right? So you begin by using your reason and identifying that the desire is leading away from what is good for you. Use your reason well. But then rationalization is the process of using your reason to undermine your own reason's ability to tell what is right for you. And that's what you do, right? You start telling yourself the stories like the ones I said. And then you reach the end of the rationalization by saying, hey, let me sit down and play video games, right? You succumb to the desire, and then you lie to yourself about why it is that you're succumbing to the desire, because you don't like to recognize to yourself that you're lying to yourself, right? So the self-deception is pretty weird. But anyway, we do that a lot, says Kant. In fact, Kant thinks, and this is a topic for subsequent discussions, that when we do the wrong thing, the morally wrong thing, we're doing something like this. We're either giving into a desire, so we're lying to ourselves, we're rationalizing what we know is something we shouldn't be doing. But these are the two main obstacles for living rationally, for having a good life, for being free. Within this story, there are two kinds of tendencies. They're both kind of desires, so they're both a grounded in human nature. And they're also obstacles. They're part of the human condition. They're obstacles for living a good life. And one is self-love. So for Kant, self-love, it's a kind of main obstacle. And self-love is the tendency to act out of self-interest. In other words, is the tendency to seek your own happiness. And remember, happiness and the good life are not exactly the same thing for Kant. The happy life is the life in which you get what you want, you attain your goals. And self-love is this desire, and again, desire is the right way, desire to do things that promote your goals in your interest. And stated that way, it's fine, right? By itself, it's not morally problematic. So as such, Self-love is fine, is morally neutral, perhaps even morally good, but it can, if unchecked, lead to immoral behavior. And we'll talk about this later, but especially when you start treating yourself as though you're more morally important than others. And in your pursuit of self-interest, what attaining your goals, you feel perfectly entitled to say abuse the rights of others, undermine their goals and interests for the sake of pursuing or promoting your own. That's where self-love gets off the rails. Self-love by itself is fine, pursue your happiness, that's fine, but within the bounds of morality, and in particular within the bounds of not thinking of yourself as superior to others or your interests as more valuable than others. But we'll talk about that later. For now, the point is that we have this tendency, this desire to promote and pursue what is makes us happy, and that's fine, but it's fine only within limits. Morality must put limits on that desire for self-love in order so that we doesn't become a malicious or immoral desire by undermining others more or less. So morality must check and constrain self-love. It's really this self-conceit that Kant thinks is the main obstacle for living a virtuous life, for living a good life, and for being free. And self-conceit is kind of like self-love, but it's much darker and deeper and more problematic. So this is the main obstacle for living a good life, claims Kant. So Kant describes self-conceit as a deep desire to see ourselves and for, and for others to see us as superior. And for Kant, this is deeply wrong because we're not superior. So from the moral perspective, which is the perspective of reason, which is what we think when we think well, when we use a reason, we realize we are not actually superior to others. We have equal value. We have equal dignity. And this self-conceit is the desire to see ourselves as superior. And Kant thinks is intertwined with, at least for most of us, with a lot of things we do. When we care about having an A in the class, we do care about our own intellectual learning, and we care about doing well, and we are proud of our A. We look at our A and say, wonderful, I'm doing well. It's a sign of my own intellectual growth. But Kant thinks a lot of the times, intertwined with that legitimate desire for excellence and growth, is this desire to look down upon others. Is this desire to say, I got the A and you didn't. I got one of the 2 A's in the class, 3 A's in the class, whatever, and you did it. It's the desire for seeing yourself as better than others. And it's not just the A. He thinks if you want to get into a team, a cool soccer team, if you want to run a marathon, almost everything we do, he thinks that intertwined with a legitimate desire for excellence and growth is many times the desire to separate ourselves from the others and separate ourselves by thinking of ourselves as better. We have this satisfaction, this pleasure in our own excellence, in our own successes, because we can look down upon others and say, I did it, you couldn't, you're beneath me, under my superiority or something like that. And for Kant, it's crucial that this is a feeling. This is not something we say. If now that I'm saying it, I take it most of you are thinking, oh, that sounds horrible. Like that sounds pretty immoral. And Kant says, of course it is pretty immoral. That's the point of this discussion, for you to identify some of your darker motivations and label them as they are, namely immoral motivations. So self-conceit tends to work not in this explicit way in which I'm describing it. You don't think, an A, yay, I'm better than everyone around me. You don't actually think that, at least most of us don't. But you do get the A and have the satisfaction, good, I did well. And part of the feeling of satisfaction is a feeling of contrast with those that didn't. You don't quite articulate that part, but it feels good because others didn't, right? So it has built into our satisfaction with our excellence and successes this implicit reference to others that failed, and that makes us feel good and superior. Kant thinks is a pervasive element of our human motivation for success, and it's deeply immoral. It should be extirpated. Um, One of the ways in which self-conceit manifests itself is by treating our interest or our desires or our value or our happiness as though they were more important than others, and we feel like we're more important. Kant thinks we have this. This is kind of this worm in our human nature, and morality might strike it altogether, right? Get rid of it. It's always an obstacle. It's not an obstacle for acting morally. And Kant will say it's an obstacle for living rationally too. Why? Because once you articulate it, you realize it's false. It is not the case that from a moral perspective, your happiness is more important than your neighbor's. You might care more about it because it feels closer to you or something like that, but it's not true. You don't think it's true that your interests are more valuable from the moral perspective than the interests of the neighbor. So you, by your own rational standards, realize that self-conceit is deceptive. That's why it's a mere feeling. You don't actually articulate it. That's why when it moves you to action, it never becomes fully conscious, because once it does, you realize it's false and you want to reject it if you're reasonable. Uh, in context, you should. But anyway, we should identify it as part of our motivation, and we should extirpate it to the extent that we can. In context, we can. Once we see it, we can get rid of it. Though it's an eternal battle, because we're always tempted to feel superior. So those are two of the main obstacles for living morally. Self-conceit is going to be the main one. It's going to show up here and there when we discuss more of the virtues and vices later on. But here's some of the other elements of the human conditions or traps of human nature that prevent us from living fully rationally and having a good life. One of them is radical evil, and it has a pretty grand name, but it's actually a pretty simple thing. So a radical evil is the common tendency to make something other than morality the principle upon which we act. So you do your own work and give me your paper, not because you think that's the right thing to do, that's what good students do, but rather because if you plagiarize, you get caught, and then you have punishment, and you might get kicked out of the university. In other words, that is fear of punishment that makes you do the right thing, instead of it being the right thing in your recognition that it is the right thing. So radical evil is this tendency to make something other than morality the principle upon which we act. And that's it's at the root of all. That's why radical root is at the root of all of our wrongful actions. Frailty is when we lack the will to do what we should. Again, you're playing video games. It's the day before the exam. You know what you should do for the sake of your personal growth and development and educational advancement is to study for the exam, and you know that, but then you feel lazy, you feel the draw of the video game, and just keep playing video games. You lack the will, the motivation to do what you know you should do. That's frailty. Impurity is when our motivations to do the right thing are intertwined with other non-moral motivations. So the example that Kant uses is the store owner charging a fair price. But the store owner charging the fair price, that's the right thing to do. But the store owner does so, in the case of impurity, because it's good for business. If a business has a reputation of charging the fair price, then more customers will come in then the long run, the business will do better than one that develops a reputation for cheating customers, right? The business that develops a reputation for cheating customers, it's likely going to go under. In the business that has a reputation for charging a fair price, it's likely to do better because customers we're going to go there. So a business owner that charges a fair price, partly because it's the right thing and partly because it is good for business, has an impure motivation, claims Kant. In other words, his virtue is not as great as it should be. The mere fact that it's the right thing should be enough, claims Kant, for the person to charge the fair price. The additional consideration for profit maximization is contaminating or undermining the purity of the moral commitment to charging the fair price. Another tendency is that of depravity. And depravity is a pernicious way of undermining moral commitment. And that's when one agent convinced themselves that they rationalize, they convince themselves that morality is optional. They recognize that something is the right thing, but then they treat it as though that's something that it's optional. They don't have to do, as though moralities or the commands of morality are something that are not required of them as moral agents. And an example is when a student realizes that plagiarizing a paper is wrong, but then they do it for, say, because other people do it too, or something like that. Some non-moral consideration becomes the reason for doing the immoral thing. They treat morality as merely optional. So let's stop here. These are some of the obstacles for living rationally, living well. They're all internal to the human person. We are our worst enemy because the real battles for us to live well happen within us. And then the battles that we have outside with other people in society and things like that are important, but secondary to the main battles that happen within us. That's where the action is, claims Kant. Okay, see you next time. Bye.